The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Good afternoon, good day. Welcome to Faith Without Borders. I'm your host, Pastor Kelvin Sauls. It is a joy to have you join us today as we continue to engage in thought-provoking and solutions-oriented conversations around some of the issues that we are facing in our community right here in Los Angeles, around the United States, as well as around the world. And we're so glad that you're able to join us today as we continue to just look for ways that we can tackle some of those challenges that's going on, as well as how they are affecting our lives, and to see how we can bring a faith-rooted perspective to that as we allow our faith to be borderless, our faith to impact and affect every aspect of our lives. Today is no exception. We're going to be talking about and exploring the movie Harriet that's in theaters right now. It did very, very well at the box office last weekend, and we hope it's doing well, not just this weekend, but for the next couple of weeks, because it is a very, very powerful movie. It is a very insightful movie. And for me, it is a very, very impactful movie, because not only does this movie display the courageous and resilient leadership of Harriet Tubman and so many of our ancestors whose bold and broad shoulders we stand on right now, but I believe it also has some lessons for us for today, because as you know, the legacy of enslavement continues to affect us in so many different ways. So many schemes and systems that are still going on that seek to perpetuate that very system in so many different ways. So we're going to be looking at a variety of topics around that, and I'm so glad to welcome two leaders, here in Los Angeles. We had the opportunity to go as part of about 50 to 60, mostly women. There were a few men there, myself and a few others, who joined Black Women for Wellness, an organization here in South Los Angeles. They hosted a screening last Saturday, and so we were there, and it was just great for all of us to come together for this, what I call edutainment experience. And Aziza, Lucas-Wright was there, as well as Ganaway-Kelly. They are guests here with me as we talk about that experience, but also talk about, the lessons that we've, learned, picked up from the movie, and to see how that can be, applicable for us today. So it is a joy for me to welcome Aziza Lucas-Wright, who's here. Aziza, why don't you tell us a little bit about, yourself, what you do? Yes. I want to, preface before you say anything, how much I appreciate you and the work that we've been able to do together, in the area of preventative health education, especially bringing together or bridging, the health community and the faith community, in so many ways. So really appreciate your leadership on that. But tell us a little bit by way of introduction, a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. So by way of introduction, let's start with just community right here. I think I'd like to start with the faith community. My husband, may God rest his soul.
Yes.
He's gone on to ancestorship. He passed away on August 31st of 2015.
Yes.
But my husband was a pastor of New Vision Church of Jesus Christ. We had been in the AME Church for a good number of years, and then upon his passing, he was pastoring there. And as a kid, as a very small kid, I loved the church. I've always had a special place for the church. I always wanted to be there.
Yeah.
I grew up with when my mother passed away, a set of teenagers raised us. Her youngest brother and his wife. He was 19, she was 18. There were 6 of us, and they had 2. And they did what they could do, but they never made us go. But I was the one that would always get up and get dressed and go because I had to be there. So it was fortuitous that my work in research actually shifted back to the AME Church or to the church at large, to the African American Church, and doing work around sort of like the intersection of between wellness and faith. Yeah. So having said that, then also in the community, another dear friend of mine passed away on September 17th, the founder and executive director of South Central Prevention Coalition, Sharon Blackburn. And the board asked that I would take over, and I have become the executive director of that agency for about a year, although I had been working for her as her QA person for quite a number of years. In the academic world, though, I'm a faculty at Charles Drew University of Medicine and Science in the College of Medicine. I'm also within the College of Medicine, the co-director of the Community Engagement Division, alongside Dr. David Martins at UC. And so there, just a number of things happening there. And at UCLA, I'm working alongside Dr. Arlene Brown in the CTSI, which means the Clinical Translation Science Institute in the CERP. Community Engagement Research Project. Yes. So just a number of things. It's a lot of stuff happening.
Just a few things.
Just a few things.
But I'm glad for the connection we have, whether it's through Pastor Wright or through our work at Charles Drew, as well as at UCLA. So really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Janet, you want to just introduce yourself? It's not your first time here with us.
No.
But say a little bit about, just you and the work that you're doing at Sanctuary of Hope.
So my name is Ganaway-Kelly, and I'm the Executive Director of Sanctuary of Hope, and we provide housing and education stabilization services for transitional age youth between the ages of 16 and 25 who are homeless, foster care, at promise, or very extremely low income within the South LA and South Bay communities.
All right. And of course, we do a lot of stuff together. So we had the opportunity to took some time out of our crazily busy schedules last week, and the executive director of Black Women for Wellness, who got all our cell numbers, texted us all and said, "I need you all to show up and show out." And so we went to a movie to see the movie Harriet last week. I think we have some pictures of us out there. There we are, having a good old time. And I think there was about, 50, 60 of us there. But just a great time. And we took over the Grove.
Right.
And folk, kind of like, what these folk doing here? Well, we just come to the movies, y'all, seeing Harriet. Let's talk a little bit about, this powerful movie. But maybe first and foremost, just saying, Aziza, Janet, why did you think it was important for us to go together, or to go in the first place, but then to go together, to experience this? And so why did you say yes to come out and be a part of this, this group edutainment experience?
Absolutely. Well, certainly let me just say that when there are certain movies that are entertainment, and so you need to go for that, just to sort of unburden yourself and de-stress and all of that. But then there is inner attainment, right? And so this movie I knew was going to be beyond entertainment to inner attainment, and it was precisely what I thought it would be, and then some. So I wanted to go as an individual just for that purpose, to just continue to feed my spirit and feed my soul, and sort of fight against the daily microaggressions like the one we had at venue when they sent the young men over to ask us why we were there. So the daily microaggressions and all of that. So I just needed to be fed in that way. But when I got the call or the invitation that came from Jan to come together as a group, I knew that I wanted to certainly be a part of that group and be on the right side of history of going en masse to support it so that there will be more, of that caliber.
Yeah.
And also to just send the message that we are watching and we want, this is what we want. We want more of the kinds of pieces that have historical accuracy and that impacted us in a very special kind of way, that person's life.
Great. Janet?
Well, so for me, prior to the movie, I had read a lot of the articles about it, the pros and the cons, and the week before, one of my staff members went to a screening, and she had her own interesting take on it. So I was excited to go because I wanted to be able to form my own opinion.
Right.
And I also wanted my daughter to go because, one, she was celebrating her birthday that weekend. But I just thought it would just be good for her to see a movie that would paint a Black woman in a very positive light. And hopefully for her to walk away to see that she could be a strong leader too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was just to kind of, painting for some folk. So we were on the west side.
Yes.
So it was about 60 or so Black folk showing up at the Grove on the west side of Los Angeles. And but we had a great time, and it was just awesome. I was glad to be able to go just as a man. Harriet Tubman is one of my sheroes. And one of the individuals that I had, the pleasure of studying, and then to continue to figure out, how do we, and we'll talk about this later on, how can we, become, both, folk who can construct as well as individuals who can be conductors, you see, on railroads above ground, because we are still dealing with so many schemes and systems that are vestiges, of that evil and dehumanizing, enslavement, industry, and it manifests itself in so many different ways. So first and foremost, to go and support, the movie and the message. Secondly, it was important, for me to go with women, to support, women and be in solidarity with women, in terms of just, celebrating women leadership, the catalytic role of it, the courageous, aspects of it. And so it was just, an awesome experience, to be there. And we want to, thank Bose and Josina, for being the co-sponsors, of that event and making it possible for us, around that.
Can I say another thing? I was pleased to go, and I knew it would be that way, to go with a group of people who had a level of consciousness, who would be able to appreciate what was before them. Sometimes when we go in other parts of our community, the feedback is endemic of people who are suffering from internalized racism. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
And it's not their fault. They are the very reason why we deserve reparations. When we see how low we think of ourselves and each other, and how we don't want ourselves, and so I think, so I think that again, I knew that I was going to go with a different kind of group. I knew I was going to go with a group that would be able to pick up on certain things, celebrate certain aspects of it, get mad right where I got mad, happy right where I got happy, cried right where I cried. And so that was great to be able to do.
Yeah,
I agree.
So in terms of, the movie, what, stood out for you? 1, 2, or 3, aspects in the movie that really just kind of got you, and grabbed you, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, as you experience it. What stood out for you, in the movie?
For me, it underscored for me my transition from being a young woman who was focused on politics and sort of worshiping the middleman. And it just, as I have grown in my own spirituality, in my love of the Lord, Jesus Christ, and it just really did help to affirm and underscore that Harriet, who was an AME Zion, by the way, and even Frederick Douglass, who was in the movie, had a small. They didn't focus on him much, but he was there, and he was also AME Zion. But it focused on why they were so powerful, because when I was a younger woman in Pan-African movement and other movements, we focused on their power as if they were self-driven, and sort of self-empowered and self-informed and made, but not only by themselves, but by the issue. But what it showed for me again was that Harriet's faith in the Lord is what absolutely informed every positive and powerful aspect. Her courage, it was her faith that informed her courage, and it was her faith that gave her this servant leader character. And so it was just absolutely wonderful. So at each time, the first night I went, felt the same way last evening. I just felt lifted up, buoyed. A lot of times when I watch movies about slavery, I just leave out mad, wanting to punch somebody in the throat. But I just felt lifted and felt just the spirit. I felt a very spiritual lifting, and a sense that no matter what it looks like, we can continue to develop, we can continue to fight, we can continue to raise ourselves up by the help of God. And so, but only by acknowledgement, I think, and so personally. But that's what I got. I just felt like it was just a powerful spiritual piece.
Let's hang there for a minute around, because all three of us are individuals of faith, and we certainly put our faith into practice in what we do on a daily basis. In looking at the faith piece, around that, there was Harriet's faith, and then there was the preacher that was in the movie.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to see how the preacher's role evolved. In the movie, Harriet's dad said, "You got to go by the church." Yeah. And we were all there saying, "Oh no, not you can't be going to that preacher," because we heard him preach the sermon from what probably was the slave Bible. Right.
Oh, yeah.
We know now that there was a slave Bible.
Knew that he was he was a conductor.
Right. So it was a very subversive, way of, practicing, faith, around that. And then the other aspect also, around, just her discerning spirit, in terms of it. So say a little bit more about just the these roles that the preacher was playing in the church, and the church, becoming, a hiding place, for folk, or a stop, for folk, and how, faith in general, but particularly Christianity, was used on the plantation, in terms of, any thoughts on that?
I'm left speechless. Because I was thinking, the part that I was thinking about that when that whole scene is, how a lot of times, I'm just thinking in the terms of young people, even sometimes myself, those that are within my generation, often look as Christianity as the slavehold, right? That it continues to be that slavehold, and in that particular scene, you would think that would be the case. Right? But then you see how it manifests itself, meaning not manifests I should say how it becomes translated into being a means to freedom how you could look at it in terms of it being an example of how not only faith can oppress, but also faith can actually be an expression of freedom and taking those tools to do that.
For the most part, there may have been some ministers that were unfortunately like the white Benedict Arnolds,
right?
Because every group will have it.
Oh, absolutely.
But very clearly, it's the African Methodist Episcopal Church, or the church in general,
right?
That was the catalyst. It was the only place where Black people were allowed to congregate, and that's where plans were made.
Absolutely.
And if you see in the Black church to this day, you see the ushers standing, and they'll be doing signs behind their backs. That's what they used to do when they were having slave revolt, planning revolts and planning insurrections. They would go out into the clearing and have church, but they would position themselves yards apart from each other, and they would motion to each other, stop talking, stop planning, because Massa is on his way. And and to this day we still do the hand signs, and most of us don't know what that means. Right. But that's history. Yeah. And there's some wonderful books that Black folk have got to get in their libraries. We've got to get in our libraries, Black Religion and Black Radicalism by Lincoln, I believe Lincoln and Mamiah, and then the African American Church and the Black Experience. Those are books that we have to have so that we can know our history. And it's not necessarily to proselytize, but it's just to let folk know that the church was not the harbinger of slavery. It was the place where secretly this is how we were able to move. Also fast forwarding to the civil rights movement, which is a little tangential, but kind of to the point. There's a book written by, and I'll think of his name in a minute, but he was a part of certainly of Martin's team, and he wrote a book called The Easy Burden, and The Easy Burden gave a historical reference about how these young people were able to stand in these lines, let white folk throw things at them, sick dogs on, and then but stand firm.
The discipline
and stand, so disciplined and courageous. Yes. But they would go to the church first, and they would do some things in church to get themselves ready. And so the church has been absolutely pivotal for, and not the Pan-African movement, the church. And I was a part of the Pan-African movement. I loved it. But, it was the church and what happened in the churches that really absolutely are responsible for moving us to the place where we could even sit down and discuss Pan-Africanism and all that kind of thing. So we have got to not let people sort of bastardize our history relative to the church. The church was way too important and wonderful.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to underscore the fact that the church, or I really should say the Black church, and maybe even go further, say the Black Liberation Church.
Yes,
you see,
theology,
clearly played a significant role, in how it was, able to be subversive and to be liberative during those times, and how it's portrayed. I think in the movie is very, very powerful in terms of people having to know and understand what role that preacher played. Because as a pastor and a preacher, I mean, when we were preaching that sermon the first time, I'm like, hell no!
I said,
come on, man,
what's going on?
I said, really?
But you remember
lead out with that?
When he was speaking, he did look back the kind of.
I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah, he did.
It's a little wink or something.
Yeah, and I was like, okay.
I didn't say that. I just like, oh my God, they're going to lead out with that, knowing what we have. Really?
But
they're not reading your stuff.
But then it was a powerful development in terms of how in the end, and then that pastor in the end paying a price with his life because they figured out. They came for the subversive and the liberative, aspects that he, played, in that. So, and then for Harriet, of course, faith was at the center of just what, fortified her and what enabled her to forge ahead, in all of the the risky moves, that she made, in terms of that. Say a little bit about, when you hear, and I know Jen and I have talked about this before, when you hear about the North Star.
Yeah.
Okay,
It depends on who's saying it and why they're saying it.
Right. So this is the significance of discernment. The instruction of the North Star. Of course, we know Harriet suffered, by way of blackouts, because of a very, very, bad injury she had to her head, that really, fractured her skull, in so many ways, and she had a scar to prove it, and so she would have these blackouts, but also those same blackouts would remind her of, the trauma that her family has gone through, while at the same time it also became an opportunity for her to hear from God in terms of direction and guidance. And so clearly it talks about generational trauma. It talks about frozen trauma. But yet in the midst of that, God was still able to break through, by becoming her GPS in terms of which direction, to go to, around that. You want to say a little bit about, how you've experienced that in the movie?
Yes, certainly. Well, I'll tell you, I drew a correlation between the prophetic visions that she received and that those of who was it who did had just led many insurrections, although he was caught and executed.
Nat Turner.
Nat Turner. Nat Turner. Thank you, Nat Turner. And so. Just sort of, just thinking about that, and was it one day after the first time I saw it, not this last time, yesterday, but one time in between, I was listening to Urban View, good thing to purchase and pay for and watch and listen to rather, and they were talking about they had a gentleman on who knew Martin. And he was talking about how when you spoke with Martin, he had a way of sort of looking beyond you to talk about what was happening. And he said you could tell that he knew that his time was short. And it reminded me of his last, his last sermon. He says, "I've been to the mountaintop."
To the mountaintop, yep.
Yeah. So he had a visitation, I do believe, which settled him, but steeled him. And girded him and made him continue to make those very dangerous and difficult decisions to move forward in leadership. And so I just do believe that people are visited and they are given very personal kinds of audiences. And again, prophetic messages.
And that invitation to kind of make a deep connection. And sometimes that deep connection takes us to places of pain in our lives.
Yeah.
Right.
But, I just believe that pain is a pathway to new possibilities.
Yeah.
And I think this movie demonstrates that in so many, powerful ways as she, deals with her affliction and deals with the pain of all these traumatic experiences. It's in the midst of that, that God is able to break through and provide, guidance and assistance, for her, in terms of that. Janet, the North Star, that was the instruction, how in the work that you are doing, for instance, which very, very powerful work with our young people, how are you experiencing, the North Star, or how has, Harriet inspired you to kind of, connect with that?
I think with the movie, what I really honed in on was the whole self-determination and grit. And then how all of that tied into not only her own spiritualness and having the ability to connect, but also to feel, just personally feel enlightenment. Like there is always something positive and good after going through so much turmoil, trauma, stress, all those things. And how does that balance when you are a Black woman, right? And then how does that translate into being a Black woman and being in a leadership role and having those that you need to lead, right? Have these high expectations of you, but also have some form of skepticism, right, about if you're going to reach your actual point or your actual destination, however that destination is determined to be. And so from the aspect of Harriet, for me, and I'm just talking about me because I was really kind of picking through everything that she said from the time that she was about to cross the river, and I was like, okay, she's about to pass out. So what's next? And, you know, and to coming up with ways where, you know, the water in itself. Remember when she gets to the water, right? And then she has a what is it? She has a premonition or a vision that, you know, if she continues on her current path, that they're going to run into, or she's going to be caught. And so, you know, you're looking at this body of water. It's a river, and we all know how dangerous rivers can be. But when she gets to the river, it's kind of okay. She makes that jump. Yeah. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. It was a Red
Sea.
It was a Red Sea experience.
Yes. It's like she makes that jump and she makes that leap. And sometimes in life, that's what you got to do. Yeah. You have to jump and you have to leap. And I think that is what set the stage for me. The Harriet movie. Yeah. The jumping, the leaping, the making your destination, connecting with your faith, however that connection may come to you. You know, hers was quite different. Don't want to be a movie spoiler, but that's what I felt was most impactful. Yeah.
I know, you know, we have a call, you know, that we're gonna, you know, take, but I want to talk about just, you know, Cynthia Erivo, you know, the lead, you know, actor in this, and just the outstanding, you know, role that she played, even though, you know, there was some controversy around it. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but we want to give her, you know, some props and some shout outs because she did a
fantastic job.
She was wonderful.
So let's see. I believe we have a call. Let's see, Laurent, you wanna you know, hit that call. Good afternoon. Welcome to Faith Without Borders.
Good afternoon. How are you? Can you hear me?
Hello, caller. Are you still there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
No, I cannot hear you. So let's quickly make sure that we are good.
Hello.
Here.
Can you hear me?
Okay, we're gonna.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you. Hear her on this one.
Can you hear me?
Well.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, just hold on a minute.
Okay.
Okay,
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now. Go ahead. Good afternoon. Welcome to Faith Without Borders.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, guys?
Yes, we can hear you. You have a question or a brief comment?
Yeah, I have a brief comment. You know what? I've been listening to the show. It's a great show, and Pastor Sauls, you're doing a good job.
Yes, thank you so much. Mm-hmm. And, you know, who am I talking with?
This is D-Nice.
All right, D-Nice. How you doing, brother?
Man, I'm doing fine, man. You know what? I appreciate what I'm hearing on the show, man, because like I said, I know you're being real tame on the show, right? Because me and you have talked many times. There's an underlining to this scenario to where, as men, as we go and we watch and share this experience that this writer was able to put together and these directors have produced to give us this Harriet movie, man, I'm telling you, it shines a light on what they're doing, but, man, what are the guys doing to really support? What are we that should be what we're doing in the real time now and carrying on. We're going back in history, but what's going on moving forward, Pastor? I know you've thought about it. I've thought about it. Other men of God have thought about it, but I'm saying it was a great movie. It's saying a lot, and we really appreciate you guys bringing it to the forefront.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's time for us to really use history as an example because history repeats itself.
Yeah.
In the decayed state we are now, we actually need to start an underground railroad today for the society and this government today that's trying to oppress us and put us back in time. And we have all the tools with God is giving us. We've got the education. We've got the implementation. We have everything. And we've got women now that know that they can step up and be appreciated for what they contribute to the cause.
Yeah.
And so I respect the movie so much. I respect what you guys are bringing it out, man. But, you know, there's an underlying message we got to really get these guys on board with, man.
Yeah.
If we can see this woman as an example, man, come on. That should shame every man in America who feels that calls himself a black leader.
Yeah.
We got to really step up the game, man.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you. Yeah, thanks, Dina. It's good to hear from you, man. No, I agree with you, and I think that is why it was important for me to participate because, you know, as part of how I understand my leadership, you know, as a man in general, but particularly a black man, is to be in support of and in solidarity with women, and to see how, you know, through the opportunities that I have and the platforms that I have, that we continue to, you know, work intentionally to lift up the leadership of women and to see how we can continue to build a bridge between, you know, these leadership opportunities for what it is that we need to do. And yes, you know, as men, we continue to step up. We have to, you know, step up, and in our stepping up, make sure that we deal with, you know, issues of sexism, that we deal with issues, you know, of how this culture find ways of degrading, you know, women, and speak out, you know, against that. One piece that you mentioned, Denise, and we're gonna get to it, is, you know, I mean, the whole piece around, you know, sex trafficking and human trafficking. You know, we as men, you know, can become conductors, you know, on a railroad above ground to see how we can engage in the prevention of all these black women that are disappearing around this country, and we don't hear much about it, you know, to try and see, you know, how we can, you know, take a preventative posture, you know, as well as, you know, in addition to prevention, also engage in intervention, you know, around that, so we can deal with, you know, human trafficking and deal with, you know, how, you know, aspects of slavery still manifest itself, you know, here in the United States, you know, and around, you know, around the world. So when we talk about human trafficking, you know, it is not just, you know, happening, you know, out there in another country. It's happening here in Los Angeles. It's happening in Atlanta, Georgia. It's happening in so many different places, you know, around that. So yes, as men, you know, movies like this, it's very inspirational to me in terms of how I need to continue to be courageous and resilient, and how I need to, you know, continue to collaborate, you know, with so many others around facilitating freedom and liberation, you know, for so many in our community. So thanks, D-Nice. Really appreciate you calling, man, and looking forward to connecting with you soon.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you, young ladies, for stepping up, man, and showing it the way it is, man. You guys are doing a great job. Keep on doing it. Women forever.
All right. Thanks, man. Much love. Let's, you know, I mean, D-Nice bring up, you know, the whole piece about, okay, how do we today, you know, learn from the leadership of Harriet Tubman to see how through that we can continue to analyze, you know, what's happening right now in terms of, I mean, what Michelle Alexander, you know, calls the new Jim Crow.
Yes.
And, you know, in terms of the prison industrial complex, you know, how the evolution of enslavement, you know, I mean, we can talk about it in terms of what's happening in health, through health disparities, you know, what's happening through voter suppression, you know, in so many different ways. You know, how can the leadership of Harriet and how can, you know, the message of this movie be meaningful to us in what we call to do, what we need to do today in this ongoing liberatory work that we are called to.
Harriet was the most powerful, one of the most powerful in the movie when she spoke truth to power to all these folk who were now highfalutin, sitting planning with their maps and charts and all of that kind of thing. And she said, very quite simply, y'all have gotten very important. You make, and you've got these wonderful homes and pretty wives, and you made yourself very important. She said, but I'm going back because we have to. And so I think that we just need to be very careful about getting too important and always being willing to speak truth to power. There are times, in different places, I'm not going to say where I've had to say some things that I've, were not so comfortable. And I got a call. I actually got a call the next morning. And I said, I stand by what I said. If I'm in the wrong place, if I'm in the wrong institution, you let me know. Yeah. But this is what I believe to be true. And I'm standing by it. And so, I think we have to, wherever we are, whatever capacity we're in, wherever we're placed on the on the world stage, we need to first know what we stand for real. Investigate, read about it, know it, and then take a position, informed by certainly how we're wired by God and what we know to be historically accurate. Take a position and stand there. And that was what. So I was very moved by that piece and how she. And then of course that drove the hand clapping and all of that. But the other piece, I think, true that my dear friend Sylvia Drew Ivy, who was the daughter of Charles R. Drew, always says the sharpest knife on the tray is the scalpel. And so I think that we have to really get in there and get involved in policy making because we saw how the white folks galvanized and said, oh, no, we're going to create a law that says we can go get them. Yes. Back from wherever they are. Right. So that scalpel was used, and it upended all kinds of stuff. It just drove people out of the country into Canada. So that reminded me, the
fragility of your freedom, right?
Precisely. And so knowing where real power lies, again, second only to God, but also in driving policy. And because it was that policy that enabled all of the shenanigans to happen. So I think that we have to be very careful and very mindful about policy. I know a lot of times we have the group that said, not going to get involved. It just doesn't help. It's not going to change anything, but it determines how and when you're going to go to jail and how long you're going to stay.
Absolutely.
And who gets to go, who has to go. So it does matter. And so we have to, and not everybody needs to necessarily be involved in policy making. It may be in mobilizing and doing something else. It may be, the work that you're doing with young people to, sort of mitigate the ravages of internalized racism. But some need to pick up that scalpel and attack institutional racism. And then we also have to work on individual personally mediated racism. So there are all kinds of places on the battlefield for us, but we need to find ourselves there and stick and stay and be a truth to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Janet, any thoughts from you?
I was thinking about, and I think when she was originally stating, we're talking about just the different layers of. I was thinking of leadership because remember when they went back and they were talking, and she's like, "No, I'm going to go back because you guys started your walk in freedom. My walk didn't start in freedom, right?" And I was putting that in the context of the various layers of how people think of leadership, because even with Harriet. She did not know how to read, right? And so the assumption would be, as the assumption was when she made it, right? When she made it to her freedom, that she wouldn't go back. And the fact that she did not know how to read was going to be a major impediment to her and her success in being, or I should say her success or being successful as being a conductor of the Underground Railroad. And oftentimes, when we think of leadership and Harriet's, right, we sometimes get caught within those dividing lines of you're wealthy, or if you're educated, or if you're not able to display some form of what would be considered an attractive leader, right? that leadership doesn't become assumed or it doesn't resonate as your leader. But for her, it really didn't matter because the leadership that she demonstrated was all in the works. You know, her grit, her courage, her willingness to give of herself and of her life as well, in order to bring others towards freedom. And that in itself, again, really speaks volumes to just not only her grit, but just the passion and the self-awareness that she had within, and how that translates into leadership.
And she knew her assignment.
Exactly.
She was on assignment,
exactly.
And people need to know what your assignment is.
Exactly. And live into that assignment. I mean, again, everything rises and falls on leadership. Right. And again, I was just so amazed at how everybody stepped up, in leadership. So I want to just, whether it was, those who were born free, they began to understand, well, we have a responsibility to see how we can facilitate the freedom of others. Yes. Those who were born, in, slavery, and, how, they should, play a role in it. In the movie, they are good, and bad white folk. Right. And there are good and bad black folk.
As is the world. As goes the world. Yeah.
Your thoughts just on, the guy who was the capturer, he was the expert in recapturing slaves, if you will. And then his assistant that later on, joined, Harriet, he defected. In terms of that. And then what seems to be this very intriguing relationship between, Harriet, and the son of the plantation owner. Seems like there were, kind of a love connection going on. I don't know what happened, but let's talk a little bit about the good white folk, the good black folk, the bad white folk, the bad black folk. I got a sense
that he may have had a little crush, but she was very clear to him when she finally disclosed. I was always praying. She was always very clear who God was in her life and how she wanted to be free and how she, she said, I was praying, something different from whatever you thought I was praying. And so I think that they may have been like, how it's my understanding historically that they allowed their children to sometimes play with little slave kids, particularly those kids who were the children of anybody that was working in the big house. So probably a playmate, especially if the mother was charged with being the nanny or the mammy or whatever. If her mother was charged with caring for them, then they were going to play with them because what is she going to do with their own kids? They're on the same space geographically. So I think that they were playmates, and just as playmates learn to have a love for each other and an affinity for each other, he probably I would guess was conflicted by that, but his father began to then take him to rites of passage and grooming to say, "Don't you ever? This is a pig. This is an animal. This is called her a pig." Essentially, he said, "Well, he ended up calling her a pig because the dad said it's just like a pig. You can name it, you can feed it, but when it's time, you may have to eat it. Yes, and when you eat it, after you eat it, you won't remember the name." And so he was very clear what his role was in her life, even though he was conflicted emotionally. And she was very clear, I always knew who you were. You just didn't know who I was. And so I think that's what we were dealing with that dyad.
Yeah. Janet?
And that's why he said, "You are my favorite slave."
Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So you can almost infer from the movie is that they must have had some relationship growing up. So whether it's one of those where it's the connection by play, and because I didn't want to label it friendship, because I don't think you're going to be friends and then the next minute turn around and then
be eaten.
be eaten and then and say that you're going to continue to be my slave. But I also think of that in a lot of the context of also as my black friend. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes when we're in a lot of white spaces, and we may actually have grown up together, went to high school together, but we're in positions of power, influence, and we're around the table, a lot of those things tend to manifest itself in one way or another. And you're just simply that black friend in those spaces. And having the ability or the freedom to be expressive about things, as in the case of Harriet, talking about freedom, right? I want, we got these papers, my husband is free, and now I have this ability to be free. It's stated in the will that I was going to be free, and then someone kind of cuts you off at the head and says, well, that ain't so. And it's not going to be so. Right. And when we're talking about the institutionalized racism, the structural racism, oftentimes when we catch ourselves in those white spaces, even when those spaces present themselves as liberal or even present themselves as very conservative, we find ourselves in them. And it's what do we do as Harriets, right, to start to dismantle? Yeah.
I work alongside a lot of white people particularly at UCLA. And we've been doing quite a bit of work together for years. And this one white gentleman who appeared to really kind of get it in terms of community partner participatory research. Didn't have a whole lot of issues with him. I didn't. And he was absolutely a good sport, because when I introduced him at a conference, I said when I first met him, I thought he was the whitest man I'd ever seen, and surely nothing good can come from that. And everybody laughed, and he laughed along, and he was okay. But when we would have on one project we were doing, he was sort of like, he and Loretta Jones, I definitely want to mention her name. Thank God, the great Loretta Jones, who passed away November 22nd of 2018. And the founder of Healthy African American Families, and quite a powerhouse at UCLA, Andrew. But he and Loretta would.
She was a Harriet.
She was a Harriet. Loretta was conducting. They were co-conducting the meeting, and he would always run this little sort of like a pulse taker that would ask, "Do you trust the people on the committee?" And I had been working along with them for quite a number of years, but I would always write no. And I would explain it, no, because we don't always understand each other. Sometimes decisions are made even contrary to where your heart is. Sometimes you have no control over your decision to make a decision. And I said, what I do trust is a process that we mutually agree on that holds us all accountable. Don't ask me to trust nothing else but that. So because I know who I am and I know who you are in this culture. Right. So,
clearly, I mean, the industry of slavery, has certainly, impacted the very foundation, of the United States, and even before that, in terms of what happened to our the First Nations, in this land, our native sisters and brothers, in terms of what I call the Red Holocaust, which then precipitated, the Black Holocaust in terms of, the Middle Passage, and so just that stain that is there has to be dealt with in so many different ways, and it's not about making black people feel bad about the history, and making white people feel guilty about the history, but to really see how can we all engage in this journey of just reestablishing humanity.
Yes,
in terms of how we move forward, around this ongoing journey, towards freedom, around that.
About a week or two ago, I gave a talk at the University at Drew for the Friday lecture with the dean there and faculty and students. And I closed with a piece that was very, very transparent and courageous, I would say, from this young white medical doctor who listed all of his privileges because of his white skin. Mm-hmm. It was magnificent to read, and because Drew is the place where it used to be primarily a school where black doctors, were sort of created or rather spun out. Now we're in the minority in terms of the black doctors that come out of there. They're from everywhere, but which is where it is. Mm-hmm. But it was good to be able to say that and list those things from the perspective of a young white male physician. But even in that was racism, because when I got to one point, I said, now I want you guys to pay attention to this one, because he thinks he got it right. He says, he said, I realized that my white skin allowed me to learn about all these procedures that were done by people like me while I'm caring for black people. I said, even then, he has no idea, after all this time, of all the things that black people have invented, all the medical procedures, the Daniel Hill Williams, the Charles Drew. I said, so even in there, there is inherent, there's just, he just didn't even think that we could. I said, so even in that is some racism couched in that. I said, so there's always room for constant development. Yeah. Right. And just sort of putting our head and heart to the work of learning about history, the truth about things.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we're drawing to a close. In your respective areas, in this case, health, and wellness, Aziza, and youth development. How has this movie, enabled you to continue to see yourself, as a conductor, on a railroad above ground, leading us from disparity to vitality, and then for Janet, in terms of our transition age youth, leading them from being at risk to being at promise.
I feel like I'm right on the verge of some research, and I'm certainly not a basic scientist. Mine is more behavioral science, but working alongside the basic scientists who are uncovering all kinds of after effects of trauma relative to gene structure and all of that, and disease and illness. Some years ago, it was called the allostatic load, which, by the way, black women have the highest allostatic load in the world. But how the fact that we are, you heard me say it yesterday, at the top of the misery index in every single illness, black people have the worst outcomes, the highest numbers, get it the quickest, we get it the earliest, we have the worst outcomes, they can't find treatments. And so, but where I feel like we're right at a place where working alongside these researchers, basic scientists who say that they care and they want to know, when you all come up on this piece that says, for sure, 100%, slavery is the reason why African Americans have the worst outcomes, have the highest numbers, and this is the foundation, one of the foundations for reparations. Absolutely, we then deserve to have the funding for healthcare, health services. We then need to have institutions where people are studying how to reverse these kinds of things. I think that being couched sort of like right in the belly of Drew and being at UCLA. And I actually am a thesis advisor to 4 researchers, and making, just sort of speaking those kinds of things. What are you asking? Like yesterday, you heard me ask those speakers, well, what are your statistics relative to racial ethnic breakdown. You don't have any. So, but you say that anxiety and stress is a major precursor. So and we know that we have the most of it in our society. We are over policed. We are, under resourced. We have to. Of course, we have it the most. So why don't you guys look for that information so that we can take care of ourselves better? So I just think that I'm in the position to, again, speak truth to power as best I can, and always remind those who are doing basic research, basic research, as well as those doing behavioral research, to remember that to not blame the victim, to not just say black folk don't want to work out, black folk just want to eat grease, black folk just lay up. What is the root cause of this, and not blaming the victim, and making sure that folk are looking at the historical build up and lead up to why we're in the situation that we're in. Right.
And to know that when you're willing to invest in dealing with the root cause, you are actually able to then experience different kinds of fruit, right? Because of that. Anything less than that, is just a temporary fix.
Precisely.
Around that.
Yes,
Janet?
absolutely.
And I will summarize and just say, from a youth development standpoint, is having youth to realize their promise and potential is in the heritage that they find within themselves. And those heritage that they find within themselves will help them reach their destinations.
Yeah. That's great. That's
very
great.
Powerful.
Quickly, you have an event coming up because it is Youth Homeless Awareness Month. You want to just say something about that so we can invite folk out to it?
Absolutely. On November 15th at the Hawthorne Memorial Center, we are going to have our Homeless Youth Awareness Month breakfast, and it's going to be our second event that we're going to have. That's a community gathering around bringing and spreading more awareness about youth homelessness. We are going to have a keynote speaker, Dr. Cheryl Rasonis, who is a medical doctor, and she's going to be detailing or sharing her history about her experience from youth homelessness to becoming an MD. And we're going to have Wes Hall, who is going to be our MC. So I invite everyone to come out. It's going to be an amazing day of convening and learning about systems that can help, not only systems, but villages that can help you thrive.
All right, great.
Wonderful.
Aziza, you have any events coming up?
I do.
Maybe
so
mention one or two.
Just be looking out. You're going to be seeing our promo information very, very soon. Thousands and thousands of black women are no longer in L.A. County because of gentrification and other reasons around homelessness and that. We've lost thousands upon thousands of black women. And of course, you know that we need to build the fire. We need to be able to vote as blocks. We need to be able to come together and reason together. And so when we disperse like that, we leave ourselves more vulnerable in every place that we go, and then and also where you left. And so and there are many issues facing African American women. So there is a large countywide a group that has been formed, and it's called Black Women Rally for Action. So we will be having a major rally in 2020. We are also going to, from there, be spinning off think tanks and other kinds of policy, generating policy reviewing groups, working groups that sort of stem from that one large rally. But be on the lookout for it because it is building. It's like a snowball that is building, and I'm really grateful to be a part of the initial steering committee. So we meet every other Tuesday by way of telephone and or in person at the National Council of Negro Women on 54th and Mullen.
Right.
And so be on the lookout.
Awesome. Let us know how we can be supportive of.
I will.
Thank you so much, Janet Kelly, and Aziza, Lucas-Wright for being here with us. I'm so glad to be connected with you all and to collaborate with you as we see ourselves as conductors, on this railroad above ground. I am, Harriet Tubman. So we want to just commend, Cynthia, Arrivo and Janelle Monáe and all the other, actors. You all did an awesome job. We don't care who says what. It was a powerful movie with a powerful message that the United States and the world needs to hear right now. Because one thing, is clear. Harriet, shows us, around the power and the impact of, what we now call, racial capitalism. That's what, slavery or enslavement was all about. It is the racialization of capitalism, and kind of connecting capitalism and racism, and certainly, enslavement or the industry of slavery, was just a powerful manifestation of that. And to see now how can we all recover from this, how can we all be restored by it because of the trauma that was caused by this. We certainly know that we can breach all of our trauma, with the opportunity to see how we can thrive in doing what it is that God is calling us, to do. Harriet was a woman of faith, and she certainly transformed a faith that was used to oppress her people into a faith that facilitated their liberation. That is the power of faith, always pushing forward the freedom of all people and of all of creation. Thank you so much for joining us. This was Faith Without Borders. I'm your host, Pastor Kelvin Sauls, and we're looking forward to seeing you the next time. Continue to be a conductor on your railroad that is above ground towards the freedom and the liberation of those around you. Thank you so much.